Intervals is built in such a way that there's three primary features, and these three features were built out of a philosophy we had that said, as a project management application, it should focus on accountability. And so that's kind of the idea behind intervals, is that we have these features built from wanting to help people and businesses hold themselves accountable, whether it's to their team members, to each other, their peers, or administrators, or their clients. Intervals gives you the tool to track the projects necessary to have that level of accountability. And based on that philosophy, we focused on three main features. And those three main features are task management, time tracking, and reporting. The idea is that when you combine task management with time tracking, you get data on a granular level that you don't normally get if you just use time tracking alone. And then the reports tie all this together and help you cross-reference all these different data points. And I'll get into that later to show you that how all these features work together. And so we've built out some really robust reports where they can be generated in a very high-level manner, or they can be generated in a very low-level manner, depending on what data you need and how you need it delivered. So I like to start on the Projects tab because up front I like to point out that intervals is very project-centric. And what I mean by that is that every piece of information you enter intervals, whether it's a time entry or a task or a milestone or an invoice or a document, they're all in some way tied back into a parent project. And the reason for this is that you are able to determine who can access what information by giving them access to certain projects. There's 4 different user levels, and each of those different user levels determines to what extent they're able to see the information, and then the list of projects you give them access to determines which projects they can see. So I'll get into that a little bit more as well. So to start with, the project is really at the core of anything you start with intervals. So the first thing you'll do is you'll create a project. And once you do create a project, it's going to have the 4 main areas here. The details, the team, the estimated work, and then the modules. The details are pretty straightforward. These are just basic profile information about the project itself. We have a start date, an end date, and a budget. The team, these are people who have access to this project. So administrator level users by default have access to all projects, so you'll always see them in this list. From there, we have lower user levels. So the manager is the next highest user level. Managers are able to do everything within the project you give them access to. But if they don't have access to that project, they won't be able to even see those projects. But they can edit project information and see financial information and tasks and time. Resource level users, these are usually synonymous with employees or freelancers. They are the people who will be primarily doing a lot of the task work and tracking their time. So therefore, they see tasks, they see time, but they don't see any financial information. And then the executive level user, this user level was designed for limited use. It could be an I shouldn't use that word. It's more like an upper management, let's say, or your client. Let's say you have a web-savvy client who wants to log in and see where things are at. You can give them access, and they have sort of like a portal view with this user level, and they can see very limited information about their projects and where those projects are at. And each of these user levels has different toggles that you can toggle off and on. So if you want to get more granular with what they can and can't see, there's maybe 2 or 3 options for each user level that allows you to control that a little bit more. The estimated work section here, this allows us to estimate a project by breaking it down into hours, and those hours are broken down by the billable rate for each hour. So when we first create this project, it brings in all of these work types from the default settings section. So when the account was set up, all these work types were added as defaults with the default hourly rates. And when you create a project, it simply links them in. The reason this is important is because now all of the projects will be linking in the same work types. So if you wanted to get an idea of, let's say you had graphic design as one of your work types, as one of your billable rates, and you wanted to run a report across everything later, this allows you to do that because under the hood, all the projects are tied into that same graphic design billable rate. Even if the rate itself is different per project, it's still the same type of work being performed. So once it's on the project, we can modify the hourly rate if it's going to be different for this project, and then we estimate the number of hours we think it's going to take for each one. The idea is the client gives us a budget. Let's say here it's $50,000. And then by estimating each of these work types, we come in close to that budget. So we think, okay, it's going to take X many number of hours of graphic design, X many hours of copywriting, and whatever those work types are. And these will come into play more when we start adding time. The modules, these would probably be better called task categories because that's what they are. They're a way to group tasks together into different categories. And again, this list is completely customizable and available in your default settings. And just like the work types, they are linked in to the project when the project is created. Different customers I've seen use these for different purposes. Some customers will have modules that represent phases of a project. Others might have modules that represent the areas of expertise or work they do. Like, for example, a marketing company might have a branding module and then have maybe a trade show module because they build a lot of trade show setups. And then maybe they have another module for collateral because they do a lot of envelopes and letterheads, and then maybe another one for advertising because they do a lot of billboards or something for. So what these modules do is when we create a task, it allows us to categorize that task, so we can see how many tasks we have in that category, and we can also run reports on those categories later on to see how much time we spent in each of those. Another example to just kind of summarize these modules is a web design and development agency. I've seen use these for the different types of websites they might build, like a content management system versus a shopping cart. Then at the end of the year, they can say, okay, how much billable work did we do building shopping carts versus content management systems? And I'll show this more later in the reports, but it just helps you make some better business decisions about what types of projects to take on or what types of projects to take on less of based on how the data plays out. So once we have built the project, the next step is we start creating tasks. A task in intervals is it's going to be more involved than a to-do. Like, a lot of task management systems will just treat it like a to-do item, and you have a list of to-dos and you check each one off. That's not how intervals treats them. It treats a task much more like an entity that has a life cycle. So every task begins as open and eventually ends as closed. We sort of modeled the functionality after what you might see in a ticketing system or issue tracking system if you've ever dealt with help desk software. And you'll see that because of these attributes the task has. So the task has several attributes that help you manage it through that process from open to closed. The left column here is pretty straightforward. We have a client project. Here's the module I spoke of before, the category this task belongs to, and a start and a due date. Then we have the status. Now the status is the status tells us where is this task at currently, and where will it what needs to happen to it next. So for example, here's a task that's under client review, and so the next person that comes along and looks at this task knows, okay, it's being reviewed by the client. There's probably not much I need to do here unless, I don't know, maybe I need to ask the client if they've had a chance to review it. But those statuses are also customizable. And the only ones that are required are open and closed, because that's how intervals knows that a task is new and how intervals knows a task is closed. Because once intervals does see a task has been closed, it will essentially push it to the background and try to hide it from you. You can always get them back real easily, but it does that so it doesn't clutter your view with tasks you've already completed. Then we have the priority. This is another list that can be customized. It just tells us the severity of the task. It also determines the color of the band that we see across the top here. The task owner is the person managing the task. You can have multiple people as listed as the owner, or one. It's up to you. The assignee is the person responsible for doing the work, and that also can have multiple fields. And then the follower, if anybody wants to just be kept in the loop but they're not directly involved, you can add them as a follower. That way they'll receive email updates when the task is updated. And then we have an estimate field. We can estimate the number of hours here too. So previously I showed that we estimate the number of hours we think a project is going to take based on the billable rates. The task estimate lets us get a more granular estimate. And say it's got two purposes really. One is, okay, let's see how we're coming in based on our estimate. You know, we're estimating 40 hours for this one task. Let's see what we actually do. And the other is if you have assignees working on it and you don't want them to go over a certain amount of hours on it, you could say to them, hey, I've put in this estimate of 10 hours. Please try not to go over that. And then we have a summary here that tells us what is the requirements of this task. And then a milestone. And a milestone is a way, and I'll dive into this a little bit more as well, but milestones are a way to group several tasks together. So if we have a project, let's say that has 200 tasks on it, but only 30 are really relevant right now, they're due in maybe 3 weeks, we can group those 30 tasks into a single milestone. And what that does is it puts them all together with one due date. It'll show them on the calendar. It'll also give us some additional metrics on that milestone and on those tasks. So and I'm going to show more of how this task works, but I'm going to sort of do it in parallel with time tracking. So ideally, a person working on this task would come in and they would go to the Tasks tab. They could click on Assign to Me to see all the tasks assigned to them, or they can get to the task a number of different ways. There's My Overdue, there's Assigned to Me, Owned by Me. I can also set these filters to show me only a subset of tasks. That helps me drill down and narrow down only on the tasks I want to be working on. So here I'll go into this task, and ideally the first thing I would do is start a timer, because Intervals has these timers that tracks the time for you. You don't have to use the timers, but they really do help. We have noticed from our experience that when people go in afterwards to add the time to a task, they usually underestimate how much time it actually took by about 30%. So when you use these timers, you capture much more time of the actual time spent on the tasks. So now I'm in here, I'm working on the task. Let's say it's under client review and the client has called me to say, hey, I'd like to go over my feedback. So I start a timer on this task and now we're discussing it. And then what I can do is I can update the task, and I can say, okay, I spoke to the client. Here are their, here's their feedback. And then I'll go ahead and write that out, and then I'll change the status because now it's no longer under client review. I could set it back to open, and then I'll save the task. Now what this does is it changes the status to open so that other people know what needs to happen now. But what it also did was it added my comment here to the history. So now I have this trail of comments from everybody who has worked on this task. And right now it's just showing the comment that I made, and it's doing that because I have this box checked. But what it's also recording is it's recording the updates I made to the task. So if I uncheck this box, it will show me that not only did I make this comment, but I changed the status to open, and as a result, the owner and the assignee were notified. This just makes it a nice auditable trail for the task. So if there's any questions by people or by the client, like, hey, what's going on with this task? I thought so-and-so changed it. Well, you know just by looking at this, you know who changed it when, because it's all captured here. There's a few other tabs here. One is time. It's showing all the time entries that have been recorded on this task. Any documents that have been uploaded will be recorded here as well. And then the history tab is just all three of the previous tabs, but in a chronological order intertwined, so we can see them as they happened. So we can see that when the document was uploaded relevant to when the task was updated. Okay, so now that I'm done working on the task, the next thing I want to do is apply my timer. So before I do that, let me talk some more about these timers, because there are two types of timers. Under the hood, they're the same, but in the left column down here, I have my task timers. In the right column, I have my general timers. A task timer, that just means I started the timer on a task. So what that means is I know where that time's going to go, so I went to the task and started the timer. The general timers, I just started a timer. Let's say I don't have a task for this yet, or maybe a client just called me up and I want to get a timer going, and I don't know where the task is yet, so I haven't applied it yet. I just started a general timer. I can always apply that to a task later if I want to. And what will happen in the reports is if I leave it as general time, it'll show up as general time. If I put it on a task, it shows up on that task. Ideally, the time would be put on a task because it gives us more details. General time, you're just depending on the notes that you left on the time and the project it was applied to. Okay, so another nice thing about the task timers is I have a list here of tasks I'm working on. I've seen some people, which I think is really clever, what they'll do is go through their task list for the day and start and pause their timers. So they'll have 6 or 7 timers here, and those are the tasks they're going to work on that day. So they have this list here, so they can easily just click right here on the task and go back to it. But I'm done working on this task for now. So what I'll do is I'll pause the timer, and it's going to keep it here until I decide to apply it. So to apply it, I just click the Apply button, and then I have the option to round it up, which I will do, and then I'll choose the type of work. So I could say here it was a design meeting, then I can put my notes, met with client to review comps, and then I save it. And now what that does is it puts it down here on the Time tab for this task, but it also puts it on my timesheet. So under the Time tab, when you click on that, you will see your timesheet. And it's broken up into 2 parts. There's the top half and the bottom half. The top half is an aggregated view of all my time for the week, and it's grouped by project. So here I can see on Monday, here are all the projects I worked on and how many hours I spent on each one. And then for Tuesday, I can see that as well. So then for the bottom half shows each individual time entry that I have worked on for this week. So let's say, for example, I need to edit one. So here, like this one is the wrong date. I can go in here and say, this was actually on the 18th. Let's go ahead and save that. And now I have that updated. So as the week progresses, obviously this will fill out more. What will happen on Monday morning is that this timesheet will be flagged as overdue. So once a timesheet is flagged overdue, you have the option to do this if you want. It's not required, but there is a timesheet workflow where a timesheet starts as overdue, then it can be submitted for approval, and then approved. And what that does, if I decide to do this, is once a timesheet is actually approved, and if I go to last week's timesheet, you'll see this one has been approved. There's no more edit buttons here. And if I try to add time to this timesheet, it will not let me. Intervals will say the timesheet has been approved. You can no longer modify it. The reason this is important, if you opt into this workflow, is because it tells us that if we run reports for this date range, we know the time is not going to change on us. In our experience, we've worked with freelancers, even employees, even managers, all spectrums of the pay grade. People will get their time in late, or they won't enter it at all until you remind them 2 weeks later. So what this does is it allows us to put reports in front of the clients that we know are not going to change. It also helps give us a process to sort of nag people to say, hey, you need to get your timesheet filled out and approved so that we can generate these reports to show the clients. Because it can be embarrassing to put a report in front of a client, only have to change 2 days later because someone forgot to get their time in. So that is task management and time tracking in a nutshell. One thing I want to point out about tasks and projects is they do show up on this homepage calendar. as well as milestones. And I'll talk a little bit more about milestones, and then I'll go into reports, because I think milestones can be important. So the homepage calendar here, this is showing us 3 different pieces of information. It's showing us notes. So here's an example of a note, this blue thing. And they can be public or private. They're just really basic post-it notes pretty much that you can put on the calendar to remind people of different things. The gray boxes represent projects that have tasks that are due or starting that day, depending on how you set your filter. And then the green boxes, these are milestones that are due out in the future. If it was red, it would mean it was overdue. So there's some nice functionality here where for tasks, for example, let's say I have a task here that's due tomorrow. I know it's not going to get done tomorrow. I need to reschedule it. So I can just drag it over 2 days, and now it'll reschedule it for Friday, and it will send an email to all the people who were involved on that task. I can also right-click on the task and do some modifications to it as well. The default way to update a task is to click on it and then go in and click update and then change all the fields you want to change. But if you just want to change one attribute of a task, you can do easily by right-clicking on it. And this concept of right-clicking is activated throughout the application. For example, if I go to the Task tab, I can right-click on any task and get that same menu. So I can easily update the status or the title, anything really. And the same is true for projects, milestones, etc. I can right-click and quickly access different functionality. It just saves me a few clicks and from having to go through several different screens just to update one attribute. Now, milestones, like I said, are a grouping of tasks. So they show up here as a block mainly for scheduling purposes. But I should also show what they look like in the main view. But on the calendar, the idea is that I'm allowed to use that same drag and drop functionality. So let's say, for example, I have a milestone here that I know is not going to get done. I can drag it 1 day out. And now it's going to ask me just to confirm a few things. One is the due date. Then it'll say, do you want to move all the tasks as well? So I could say, yeah, let's move all the tasks too, not just the milestone due date, but if I'm moving the milestone due date by 1 day, let's also move all the task due dates by 1 day. And then if there are other milestones for this project after this one, I can move those too. So if by moving this milestone I'm affecting the next milestone, I could say, yeah, let's move the next one too. And then if I want, I can add a little bit more intelligence, a little more logic to say, keep the due dates off the weekends, just so people don't, if you're really hard on due dates, then this is helpful because then people don't get assigned stuff due on a Saturday or Sunday. Now the milestone itself shows us all the tasks that belong to it here in a nice list view, again with that right-click functionality. So now I can focus on a subset of tasks just for this project. And what else it does is it shows me here, it's summing up the estimates on all the tasks. So I could say this milestone, okay, it's going to take 124 hours because each task added up has an estimate of 124 hours. I've spent 3 hours on it, so I have 120 hours left. So if you look at estimated versus actual based on time tracking data, I'm 2.4% into the milestone. Now it's going to show me a summary to show me what status all these different tasks are at. And now we can see that, well, I've closed 24 of the 31 tasks. So if you're looking at just task numbers, I'm 77% complete. This metric here is captured pretty well on this Graphs tab where we have tasks by status. You can see here a task begins as open and moves across those statuses I mentioned previously until it's closed. So we can see that 2 tasks really haven't moved. One is stuck with needs assistance, another one's under client review, and one's being verified by developers. Once they all get moved over to closed, our milestone is complete. We also have some other graphs here that help you plan out the milestone. For example, the modules, the task categories we talked about. If you want to evenly distribute a milestone based on those modules, or if you don't want it evenly distributed, you can use this graph to do so. We can see how much time people have been contributing recently to this milestone. And then we can also see how many tasks are assigned to each person based on assignee. So if we're trying to evenly weight a milestone across different people, we can do that as well. And the milestones have the same concept where they have a tab for comments and updates and documents and history where where it shows everything. And so let me go into reports now. So I would say 90% of the reports are based on time tracking data. The most basic of the reports you will see on the home page when you're in a weekly view, and this is a bar graph here of your weekly time. So here we can see how much billable and unbillable time I've put in this week. There are other graphs sprinkled throughout the application, but the bulk of the productivity reports are under the Reports tab. The pie chart, now, and like I said 90% of these reports are based on time tracking data. So the main difference in why there are so many different reports is just how they display that data, how they represent it. But one thing they all have in common is this left column here. The first top here, the view by, it tells the report how you want to segment the data. The bottom half tells intervals how you want to filter the data. So for example, here we could say, all right, I want to see the last week by person. Actually, let's do the last week by project. Let's see what project has been worked on the most in the last week. I could say previous week and filter. Now it's going to go get all my time for the previous week here and say, okay, here are the projects as they were worked on and in proportion to how they were worked on. I can also say, okay, let's show this same data by people, and we can see which people contributed here. So it gives us a nice view if we want to compare segmented data. The trends report, this is another one I like to show because it helps us identify any seasonality or trends that are occurring over time. For example, we once had a client who was in the fashion industry, and although they didn't quite realize this when we were working with them, their workload with us really ramped up in October because they were getting ready for all the new lines coming out the following year. So after a year or two of working with them, we saw this pattern and we were able to plan out our months better because we knew that in October they were going to have a lot of work for us, but up until then it wouldn't be too much. Again, we have the segments here for this report. So I'll give you a quick example. If we wanted to see, let's say, projects over the last, let's say, year to date. Now I can segment, I can separate the data here by a week, by month, or by quarter. I'll go ahead and do monthly view because that'll give us about 8 bars of data. So here we can see how different projects, since I segmented by projects, which projects have been taking up time. And we can see here, in particular, you can see that there was one project here that took a lot of time in March. And then here's this green one that took a lot of time in May and June. And we can reference it down here with what we have. And it also shows us the monthly average here. If I had done it by week, it would show us weekly average. This can be nice if let's say we wanted to get an idea of the weekly average our team was putting in hours. I could do the same report by week. I could say, let's show the previous quarter and run that and say by people. And now what this report will show me, it'll say, okay, our weekly average is 107 hours per week. Or I could say, all right, show me one person. What is this one person's weekly average? Now I can see, okay, it's 35 hours per week for this one person. So I can get a lot of interesting data from this one report just by modifying these different segments and filters in the left column. The Periscope report is useful if you are used to a Gantt chart view. We built this report because we did have a few customers asking about Gantt charts. So we built this one because it shows your projects, your milestones, and your tasks along a timeline similar to that of a Gantt chart. It does not have the functionality of a Gantt chart in that I can't drag these around to reschedule them, and there's no critical path where I move one thing, it moves everything else. But if you just want to get a picture of your pipeline, what's coming up, how are things currently going, what do I have scheduled, this report's nice for doing that. The project activity report, this one is important because this is the most detailed report I believe we have in intervals. And by default, though, it doesn't give you these details. So by default, it's going to give us a summary. So let's say previous week, I want to see a summary of time. So here it's broken down by work type. So we can see here that the previous week we had an hour and a half of copywriting and 3¼ hours of database, and it's grouped by hourly rate. So we can get a feel for where our time is going. But where this report gets really powerful is I could say, all right, I want to know exactly where that time went. I want to know by date. So now I run this report, and the bottom half has this incredibly detailed view that says, okay, here on the 17th, there was just some general time added. Here on the 16th, we had this particular task was worked on. And then we move on down the list, and here's the 15th of August. We see all this different time going in, and it even gets subtotaled here. So we have, okay, on this date, we had 19 hours from our team for a billable total of $2,361.88. This report is really useful if I run it by task. Let's say I have a client calling me up and saying, hey, we paid you a $5,000 retainer agreement and it's all been used up. Can you tell me where all that time went? Or they may say, hey, we paid you $30,000 to build this website. Where did all of that time go? Well, you can look at this report by task and see exactly which task the time went. So for example, you might look at it and say, okay, look, here's a task that we worked on and it took us 2 hours. And that was something, you asked us to do that. And now they say, oh yes, okay, now I remember. I have this task that I asked you to work on. And what it's getting at is it's showing that all the little time entries add up. It's showing that over time, here we had half an hour of work for $81. Yeah, it adds up. We get down and down and down, then we do a total here, and we're at $12,000. So all these little time entries just add up and add up. The cross-chart report is another one I like to show because this one's a little different than the others in that it lets you define the X and Y axes. So for example, I could show, let's go previous week by person and by project. And here we get a nice view of last week, and it shows us who worked on what. And I'm sorting it by total so we see which projects got the most attention. So now what's nice about this report is because you can cross-reference different data points, you can answer a lot of different questions. So an example is we use this report because we wanted to know which of our clients are getting the least amount of billable work performed on them. So we ran it by client and by, I think it was by client and by work type. And what that allowed us to do is it allowed us to identify two things: the clients that were using most of our time and that we were billing out the most, and then the clients that weren't really using any of our time at all. And we monitored this report over time, and we could see, okay, there are some clients who we have a relationship with but aren't using us. It may be time to cut that relationship and focus on the clients that are using us. And it helped us narrow down our client list and just focus, which is good for morale for our employees. The project landscape report is a good report because it shows a high-level view of every project you currently have. So let's say, for example, I'm going to look at this particular client and I want to see what projects. They have 2 active projects going on. If I look at the time tab, it's going to show me how much time we estimated on each project and what the actuals are. So, for example, here and then it'll show us the differences. So here we can see we have 44 hours. We're over 44 hours on this one project. We're under 500 on this one. And what this tells me, and the other tabs here will confirm this, is that this one project is completed. It just needs a few finishing touches. The other project has just begun because, as we can see, we have 512 hours estimated, but we've only done 4.5. The budget and invoices tab is going to show us that same data but in dollar amounts. So we see that budget we filled out. We see a calculation of our billable work. So all the time entries cross-referenced with their hourly rates and summed up here. We see the fees, and then we see the payments they've made. And now we see the outstanding balance. So at this point, the project is pretty much done. We just have to decide, are we going to try and collect on that $262 they still owe us, or are we just going to say, hey, this is a $58,000 project, we're just going to let it go. And then this other project, we can see that they prepaid us $10,000, but we've only done $668 worth of work. So we have an outstanding balance. We actually have a credit. We have a credit of $8,500 here. So we still should be working on this project and are still, I guess, indebted to the customer on this one. The task tab is going to show us how many tasks we have total, how many we have not started, how many are overdue and open and closed. And that gives us an idea, too, as to where these projects are at. And what's also nice about this report is if I want to know, okay, what 4 tasks haven't been started yet, I just click on that number 4, and it brings me to those 4 tasks right away, that I can get at those quickly. The reports themselves, because they can be generated in so many different ways, once you've run a report, we do give you the option to save the report. So down here you see there's a link to save it. I can save it and give it a name, and once I do that, it'll save the parameters by which I ran the report. So now I can rerun the report at a later time. So for example, I saved one already called last week by person. I can run that really quickly and get that data. So I don't have to fill out all these options in the left column every time I want to get at that report. I have it saved here for my quick access. One more thing I just wanted to show real quick on projects. I mentioned there was graphs spread throughout the application, and one area where there are several is the project dashboard. So this project dashboard, it's kind of hidden, but it shows you nicely what's going on with the project. For example, this one has all of them closed. So let's find a project here without so many closed tasks. So here we can see the status of all the tasks for this project. We can see time by module. And then we can scroll down here and see where we're at visually with the estimated versus actual. And then we can see the financial information about the project. And one nice thing that Intervals will show you too is it'll show you 2 hourly rates, the estimated hourly rate and the actual hourly rate. And what's nice about this is that it's kind of saying, okay, if you got paid for all this work, what would your average hourly rate be? Or if you cut your losses now and didn't get paid, what would your hourly rate be? And what's nice about these metrics is that if you are doing value-based pricing where you're just doing a flat bid, it shows you what would your hourly rate have been for this whole project. And Intervals will show you that in general too, how many hours you spent on a project that you flat bid, which is nice because you can reference that back to what you charge the client and quickly figure out, okay, am I truly getting what I am worth on this project? So another nice page that shows this data is this estimated versus actual tab. The estimated versus actual tab shows us that same data that was in that sideways bar graph, but what it does is it shows it in numerical values. So I have copywriting here, database design, etc. And I estimated 50 hours, 10 hours. The actual, the difference. Now it's showing me the difference in the number of hours, which that number should be familiar from the project landscape report. And then it also shows me the actual difference. So we can see, the project estimated amount is 70,000. We've performed 668. So it's very early on in this project. We're estimating, we still have $69,000 worth of work to get through. And then here are those calculated hourly rates again. So at this point, I've covered task management, time tracking reports, and the peripheral features that go along with those.